because there's it's picturesque, but there's also a dark side to it, and there are many different locations there as well that lend themselves to a story. So in each novel I try to choose a different setting to get some variety, but they're all set in Edinburgh.
What about you?
Yeah, I love settings as well, actually. I love to read books with a very rich sense of place. For example, when I was younger, Lawrence Durrell, the Alexandria Quartet, really struck me as a masterful study of place. But in my own writing, I've had an interesting relationship with this because I come from Liverpool, but I never wanted to write about Liverpool because I just felt a strange relationship with it. I lived abroad for 10 years. I was in Eastern Europe and I was writing about Poland and Hungary and places. But finally, when I signed a deal with the book folks, they said, could you please write some books set in the UK? So I decided to actually face my fears and write one set in Liverpool, and this series is all set in Liverpool. And it's actually been, I guess, for me to return to that and try and tap into some of my anxieties about it has helped to perhaps bring the setting to life.
But what's interesting is Peter May, some of you would have read Peter May, the crime writer. The man is an absolute magician. You know, give him words and he will paint pictures and he'll make you see things and appreciate things. And he's always written a lot of description. And rather like Laurie Lee, there are very few writers like this, but very like Laurie Lee, it's so wonderful you'll just read it even though nothing's happening. And a couple of years ago, his latest book came out, and the reviews on Amazon, for the first time, were mixed. And the thing they were describing was too much description. And it's a challenge for writers, really, because editors will look at it and think, yeah, it's wonderful description, but actually there's a page and a half of it. Yeah. And you don't really need that, because the reader's saying, for God's sake, get on with the story. And it is a big challenge for writers, really. This is how I began The Girl in the Meadow, and then we'll hand over to yourselves if you've got any questions to the end of the first half. This is only a few lines, but this is how I started it. She lay where she had lain undisturbed for 30 years, lying silently in the darkness, seemingly all but forgotten, even by those closest to her and who loved her the most. Her life had been taken in a moment of wickedness that outraged all decency, and she'd been hidden away ever since where no one would look, out of sight, out of mind, and rarely mentioned. However, the day was coming when she would be exposed to the light once more, when her memory could again be cherished, and when dark secrets could at last be revealed. And I think in terms of beginning stories, you mentioned the question. I think that's absolutely vital, that the reader looks at it and thinks, I have to find out what happens. I have to get to the end of the first page and turn the next page and find out. And if you've got them 3 or 4 pages in, you've probably got them for the whole book as long as you do it right, really. So, well, to the end of the first half, any questions from people on starts? Go on then. This is Tracy Houghton, who is a successful novelist herself and gave a talk last night as part of Book Week.
Thank you, John. It's lovely to be here in the audience and not have to do anything at front. I'd like to ask you all what book that you've written had the most difficult beginning, so the one that you just couldn't get right or had to redraft lots of times or just sat there with that blank page for ages thinking, I don't know what I'm going to put down here. And how did you overcome that difficulty?
Next. The beginning that I was most proud of was A Flicker in the Night that I wrote, and I thought the start was brilliant. And it was only when Eric, who runs Book Folks, looked at it, I realised how imperfect it was. So that became quite difficult because it was a start that was too long. There was a page and a half of it, and it was me waffling on. And Eric said, "Look, let's cut it to half a page and let's see how that goes, really." So that's, from my point of view, that was the most difficult.
Yeah, I can't think of one that's specific. If I get stuck, if I'm not sure at the beginning, I just stop, because I know I can go over it later and improve it later. It's important to just get something down on the page and move along, and then you can fix it later.
That's interesting. I often say that I hate writing, but I love editing.
Yeah.
I love going back and layering it and editing and rewriting. I mean, I wish I didn't work this way, but I tend to write a chapter, then go back and rewrite the chapter, and then rewrite it again. And it takes me ages to write, but psychologically it works for me, really. Whereas I know other writers, just like you're probably like that, just get on with it and tell the story.
Yeah, I think for the kind of beginning you're asking about, I had an experience of a novel that I wrote hasn't been published yet, although the book folks have signed the rights to it. It's set during the Warsaw Uprising, and I just had this scene in my mind of this man walking down this street that everything's been destroyed, and he's just carrying a bucket of water. And this scene like really fixated me. But the problem was I didn't know why. Well, I didn't know where it was going. So I kept writing it, but I couldn't get it to develop, and so I put it aside. And then I came back to it, and then I thought, should I leave this? But eventually that did become the start of that novel. And I guess the reason what I had to see was the theme of what did that mean to me. Who was that character? Eventually that character had to become a person instead of just a kind of an empty symbol, which he eventually did. But that's the hardest book I've ever written.
Well, I think, yeah, as writers, you've got to be prepared to delete stuff and be honest with yourself and say, this is actually not very good, and do something else.
I think Evidence Pool, for me, the fourth in the National Rated series, that was the hardest one. Because again, the publisher Eric basically said, Ian, do you think you could contain it a little bit? Because the first three, there's different things going on, there's murders happening, but like, I'll level with you, I get a bit bored. So I kind of thinking, well, let's just have another aspect of policing come in. You know, let the reader experience that too, along with the murder investigation. Like, there are different strands to investigate murder. It's not all about the murder detectives. So I said to him, Aaron, what do you mean? And he said, well, just have it all happen in one place. Sort of like a locked room. I was like, okay. I'd never written a locked room mystery, and that was Evidence Pool. And that was tough to write, because everything had to take place in the house, you know? And it was like, am I going to go off at a little tangent? And I realised I couldn't. So that was tough to write.
Yeah, it's quite funny you're saying that, because I thought it only happened to me, but clearly to you as well. When I my first novel with the book folks, they go back to me and said, oh well, it's okay potentially, but you should cut it by a quarter. And it was as if they had asked me to chop off a limb of my newborn baby. So I threw a massive tantrum, I threw a massive tantrum at home. And
give Eric time, he will
and after I calmed down, I asked myself, do you want to get published or not? And I thought, yes, I do. So I wrote a cheerful email back. Of course, mutilated novel coming back, peasants. You will realise that you're wrong later, but okay.
What we've all found with Eric and the team at the book folks, and it's the same with all book publishers, is that they will let you argue. It's not like they're saying, we're right, you're wrong. And I've certainly found that Eric, if you say, I really feel strongly about this, he'll go, well, we'll go for it then. Any other questions? Yeah.
I found that in writing one of my novels, what I did was I started it and then figured out that I was giving too much away once I started getting into the novel. So what I did was I went back, took out half the start and just then let the end of the start to build up the tension, to ask the questions that were required. Have any of you had to do that?
Often.
Yeah.
There's a great saying in writing that you have to start late and finish early. Like, start the story at the latest point you can start it. And a classic mistake that we make, certainly that I've made starting out, is you begin with somebody waking up, you begin with somebody arriving. Yeah. You're always tempted to begin like this, but once you learn, just chop all that out and just start. They're already there. It's already started. It just makes the writing flow so much better.
I wrote a novel a few years ago, and one of the scenes, a blizzard one of the scenes happened at a hospital in the middle of the night, and an old fellow who was crucial to the plot had died, and they didn't know why. And there was this scene when he died, and it was so slow, and I couldn't work out why. And the reason why, and it didn't take much of a genius once I'd sat down and had a cup of coffee, was that there were two characters, two nurses, the sister and the nurse, and they were both giving the same information, repeating each other. So once one of them was removed completely, it gave pace to it, and suddenly the whole story kept moving.
And that is the beauty as well of having cracking editing team, which again, those guys at the back, they just save me time and time again with things like that. Because you read it and you read it and read it and you get word line to it and you just think, oh, this is great, and then they'll come back and say, well, okay, this is great, but you kind of covered that in this chapter, have I? You go back and go, oh my God, I have. And then, but it's a different sentence in the next one. So it's, you know, I said to them last night actually, there is no I in team, and I can come up with a story, but what you get in this book is a team effort that makes it stronger, and it's fantastic.
I think it's the most difficult thing all writers do, which is letting someone else read it. If I give writers out there one tip, it's never let your wife read it, because the only time she ever read one of my novels, she lay in bed next to me and tuttered for an entire week. After that, she hasn't read another of my books. Two things: get a dog and don't let your wife read it. One more question, and then we'll break and let you get a drink.
There's this sort of essential dichotomy of approach. You've got people who just love to write and will sit down and write and write and write, and there are those who spend weeks and weeks planning and organising it. That seems to me a totally different approach. So those who like to write, do they stop halfway through and then plan what's going to come next? And those who are planning it in detail, do they halfway through think, oh shucks, this is no good, and go off at a tangent?
I don't think you think no good. I think what happens is you plan and begin, and then if you're writing well, the story will go its own way. So angles you hadn't thought of, plot lines you hadn't thought of, will come in, and the story will go in a different direction. I found, and I know it's not the same for everyone, but if I just write, and I've tried it, you write yourself into corners, and then you have to go back and rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it. But yeah, it's. I mean, I like planning. You know, I spend, like you, a number of weeks, you know, walking the dog and making cups of tea, really, before I ever write anything, and then just get on with it. What about you, Ian?
I find planning for me is a form of resistance. So you can talk about procrastination and you can talk about resistance, and to me they're two entirely separate things. So if I'm planning, I'm resisting writing that book. Okay, so I'm just, this is great, planning. I'm going to write it because I'm going to plan the thing forever, and then oh, I've got another book idea, and I'll just get onto that, planning. So I worked out, actually, no, you've got to face that blank page, face that fear that you're not going to be able to do it, it's not going to be publishable, it's not going to work out, and just go, no, I'm writing this myself, and I'm just going to go for it. And that's what I'd say to anybody who's got that kind of think, well, I think I can do it. You just need to give yourself the opportunity to try it. It's not that you can't write a book, you've just never tried it. And I think that's the difference. Like, I left school, like I said, with nothing. So I shouldn't really be sat here. I've done no creative writing stuff, I've done absolutely nothing like that. But I've written 9 books. So I've repeated it again and again and again. But it's the same fear when I come to write a new book. You know, it's not like, I just roll these out now. It's not. It's just...
Thank you, that's excellent.
Writers are very good at not writing, making cups of tea, walking the dog and all that kind of stuff. And my only writing joke is 2 novelists meet in the middle of the street, and one of them says, I'm writing a novel, and the other one goes, neither am I. Keeping going as writers, keeping going in your stories. And a number of years ago, it was Christmas Eve, and I remember it vividly, I was with Robert Hale, the London-based publisher, and things were going okay. I was never going to be a multi-seller, but I was doing all right, and I was getting better and better at what I did and learning the craft. And they sent a letter out saying, we're going bust. And overnight, I lost my publishing contract. And the guys around this table will have had moments when we've had rejections, when you thought you were going to get accepted. You maybe have had publishers that have gone bust. I know there are people in this room that have lost publishers fairly recently. So the question is, what on earth keeps you going, Ian? You must have had setbacks along the way.
Oh, yeah, loads. Absolutely loads. And I think it would be easy to just say, well, if you don't enjoy it, or you're not really making a living from
Can
it.
you hear at the back, by the way?
Yes.
Struggling to hear a bit.
Okay. If you don't enjoy it, if you're not making a living from it, you know, why on earth are you carrying on doing it? You know, like, because it's hard work. You know, it's lonely work. You've got to be self-motivated. You've got to have the discipline to sit in the chair every single day and write, and even when you don't want to. And I think, for me, anyway, I think it's always been with me to write. I think even at school, I would write good stories, and it's just one thing that's been with me all the time. And the police interrupted my writing career for 30 years. And now I've got the time. It won't go. And so I could get to the end of a book and I go, well, I'm never writing again, you know, because it'd be easy to do that. And then lo and behold, I'm sat there going, right, here we go, a blank page, here we go. And so I don't think, in the end, it's not about the money, it's not about earning a living, it's about, well, for want of a better word, a calling that won't go away. And it's like, it's not going to leave you, no matter how much you want to put that book down that you're writing, those characters are at you, they don't go away, and things come up when you're out that remind you of them. It's like, oh, I need to get back and I need to do that. For me anyway, that's how it is. So I think I will always be writing. Whether it's crime, I don't know. It depends what comes up. I mean, I enjoy writing crime, but it's whatever story grabs you, really, for me.
What about yourself?
For me, it's different. I have a job, of course, a day job that pays the bills, as it were, and I never have to motivate myself to write. I can't wait on a Sunday or during the holidays to sit down and finally write. So that's easy. That's easy for me. But there are problems, of course, especially when you start off and you can't. Nobody wants this novel that you've written. That is really hard.
What about yourself?
Yeah, well, I've done it the hard way. So I wrote 9 novels without getting any success at all, and I could speak quite a bit about how difficult that can be. The industry is surprisingly cold. You know, you don't receive any reply at all, and if you do, it can often just be a few lines, which is quite hard to take sometimes when you've put a lot into a project. I took solace by reading the lives of famous writers who suffered a lot, like Franz Kafka. Yeah. But I would say, first of all, you've got to be clear about why you're writing. It can't just be about trying to get published, and it can't be about validation of needing someone else to tell you it's good. You've got to get past that level and be writing something that you care about writing. And for me, it helped to find other writers, and I did a master's degree in creative writing, and it really helped me, just meeting other people, meeting every week, doing workshops together, giving each other feedback and seeing other people's experiences. And it helped to learn, to keep learning, to be open. You've got to be open to things like some of the writers who don't make it are the ones who write a book and they don't want to change. They don't want to listen to criticism. You've got to accept the criticism and value it.
Yes, I think, words are not sacred. All words can be changed, and I think that's the most difficult lesson for any writer. Whether it's somebody writing their first novel, whether they're writing their 20th, really, it's that, it can be done better. And I think you have to be open with that. And certainly we found with the book folks that in the nicest possible way, you will challenge us. And, you'll get an email that say, yes, that's worked, sort of, but wouldn't it be better if? And I think, you have to be brave enough to say, actually, you're wrong. Actually, I think I did it right the first time.